The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
The Paranormal View. The Paranormal View. The Paranormal View. Time now for the Paranormal View. The Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network with your host, Henry Foister, Craig Rupp, and Jeffrey Gould. The Paranormal View.
Welcome, everybody, to the Paranormal View right here on the Para-X Radio Network. We appreciate each and every one out there for being here tonight, and those who are listening from around the world. If you're not here with us, you can come over to para-x.com, click on the live chat button at the top of the page, and you'll be in with all these wonderful people here. And I tell you, tonight's going to be a special night. We have a great guest lined up with us, and I'm sure everybody's going to be wanting to ask questions. And I think what we're going to do is jump right in real quick like, and I'm going to let Jeffrey kind of introduce our guest.
Yes, our guest tonight is former Canadian Minister of Defence Paul Hellyer, who was Canada's youngest member of Parliament when he was first elected in 1949, the youngest cabinet minister appointed to Louis Saint-Laurent's government 8 years later. Although Hellyer is best known for the unification of the Canadian Armed Forces and for his 1968 chairmanship of the Task Force on Housing and Urban Development, he's maintained a lifelong interest in macroeconomics. This led him to form Action Canada, a populist movement dedicated to the concepts of full employment and low inflation with an emphasis on quality of life issues. Through the years as a journalist and political commentator, he's continued to fight for economic reforms and has written several books on the subject, including but not limited to Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, A Miracle in Waiting, Funny Money, and Jobs for All, Capitalism on Trial. In recent years, he's become interested in the extraterrestrial presence and their superior technology that we've been emulating and most likely reverse engineering. In September 2005, he became the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to state unequivocally, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. And interestingly enough, he did not add the much needed, so there. So tonight, please welcome Paul Hellyer.
Hi.
Hello,
everybody.
I'm glad you are here with us tonight. I just also want to let everybody know, if you do have questions for our guest tonight, you can private chat them to Jeffrey, Craig, or myself, and we'll get them right over to him. So I guess we might as well just jump right in. And I think the first thing we probably want to talk a little bit about is the Financial and World Bank. Now, you said that the world financial system is just a scheme. You want to tell everybody about that?
Yeah, it's a total fraud, really. It's one of the biggest. It's probably the biggest fraud in the history of the world, and it's so big that people haven't got really a clue of how to put their hands around it. But in the speech I made at the 21st annual UFO Congress in Arizona last February, I used the toughest language I ever have used on this subject, and said that it's just a Ponzi scheme, that's all it is. And the Ponzi is very simple, and that is that the privately owned banks lend the same money to many different people and collect interest from each one of them. Now that's nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you're a banker. If any one of us tried it, we'd go to jail for it. The difference between the Ponzi schemes like Bernie Madoff, for example, and the international banking system is that he was acting outside the law, whereas the international banking cartel, over a period of 2.5 centuries, have persuaded kings, queens, emperors, presidents, and prime ministers to give them legal status, to pass legislation through the legislatures or the Congress of the United States that would allow them to do this. And it's nothing but a scam, really. And it started out, not too bad. If I could just review the history a little bit. Back the time the Bank of England was incorporated, King William of Orange was fighting a war with the French and ran out of money to pay for his war supplies on the continent. So somebody said, why don't you set up a bank? So he thought that was a good idea, and has got his rich friends in London, England, to put up £1,200,000 in gold and silver and lend it all to him, the king, the government, for 8%, which is a pretty high interest rate for a government guaranteed loan. Well, then, to show his appreciation, he said, you can now print, print, another £1,200,000 and lend it to your rich friends at high interest rates. So in effect, the bank was allowed to lend the same money twice, once to the government and once to the rich friends, and collect interest from both. Well, over the centuries, the ratio, as we call it, that ratio was 2 to 1. You lend the same money twice. Over the centuries, the ratio has become much, much more generous. And in the early days of the 20th century, for example, in the United States, federally chartered banks had to have a gold reserve of 25%. So they were allowed to lend the same money 4 times. When I was a young person in Canada, the privately owned banks had to have a cash reserve of 8%. So in effect, they were allowed to lend the same money 12.5 times. Well, recently, and certainly before the meltdown in 2007, 2008, the bank ratios had got up to 20 to 1. And in Canada, it was statutory. In other countries, it was just allowed. But imagine being able to take $1,000 and lend it to 20 different people and collect interest from every one of them. And that's exactly what the banks were doing. And actually, some New York banks actually got up as high as, I think, about 30 to 1 at 1 or 2 stages. And of course, the real problem is that all of this money they're lending isn't real money. It's just virtual money. It is, in effect, credit. That's what they're lending you, because they have no money to back it up, just the 5% or less. And so they're lending you credit, and it is all debt, because all of that money is created as debt, which has to be repaid with interest. So the whole system is just like a great big balloon that they keep pumping this debt in until the balloon gets so big that we can no longer carry the debt load, and it's like a balloon with a pin stuck in it. Now, in the United States, in the last little while, you've gone through a trauma that nobody should ever have to go through, and that is your debt limit. Would you believe that none of that debt should ever have been there in the first place?
Yes, I believe that.
Your Congress sold you down the river 99 years ago when they established the Fed, and in effect gave the most valuable asset that the American people have, the right to create their own money, to the private banks in the Federal Reserve System. Well, this was a monumental error. It was the biggest heist in the history of the world, going now into the trillions and trillions of dollars. And it has made virtual slaves of people who have to work their butts off in order to pay the taxes, to pay the interest on the bonds that the banks bought from your government with money that they just created out of thin air. And it's really almost beyond comprehension. There's only about 1 person in 100 that understands how the system works, which is the reason something hasn't been done about it. Henry Ford Sr. once said that if the American people understood the banking system, there'd be a revolution in the morning. Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you, if they really understood it, there would certainly be a change that would take place, and it wouldn't take long either, because you would just demand it and stop being held captives or slaves, really, to a system that is totally out of hand.
And
It is, in fact, responsible for both the Great Depression and the recent depression. And in both cases, they were brought on deliberately by major New York banks. So the Great Depression was triggered by the New York banks, and there's a report you can get called the Pecora Report, the Senate Banking Committee report, that shows you just exactly how they did it. And then more recently, if you've looked at a film called The Inside Job, an inside job by Ferguson, you'll see that a couple of big New York institutions did the same thing over again. And it's actually, in my opinion, it's criminal. They reduced asset values in the world by about $20 trillion. They put tens of millions of people out of work, and not one of them is in jail. And that, to me, is a disgrace, because a little guy robs a bank or steals a loaf of bread, he winds up in jail. But you can bring on a recession that puts hundreds of thousands of people on the breadlines and walk away, and then have the government pick up the tab and put you back in business so you get your huge bonuses again and start the whole process all over again. Well, if you can think of anything much worse than that, I'd like to know. And the problem is today, I really think that the whole Western civilization is in jeopardy. I know that's a strong statement, but I believe it. And what they're doing to bail out Greece, what they're doing to keep Spain and Italy from having the same kind of problem, is not bailing them out. It's just lending them more money so they'll be deeper in debt. And in the long run, it'll be even more impossible for them to get out. So this is not a solution. And I just urge my friends everywhere in the world to find out the score before it's too late, because the future, not only of the happiness and the welfare of your children and their children is at stake, the future of the world is at stake in the sense that if we don't solve this financial crisis, we won't be able to finance the change from an oil economy to a clean energy economy fast enough to stop global warming and save the total destruction of large parts of the world, the dislocation of tens of millions of people. So that's how serious it is. And we set up a little website called www.victoryfortheworld.net. And you have to get the right one, because there are 3 or 4 victories for the world. At victoryfortheworld.net, you can download this speech that I'm talking about that tells you more about the financial system and recommends some good books. One by Ellen Hodgson Brown, a California lawyer, called Web of Debt. If you read the first 100 pages of that about the history of the banking system, you'll want to throw up. It's just that bad. So you can get a lot of information from there, and it also has an action plan, because people often say, what can we do about it? We're just ordinary people trying to pay our next mortgage payment or keep going, day to day. And there are things you can do. You've got to somehow get through to your Congress that they have to fix this problem once and for all, and that if they don't, they're toast, because they don't understand anything else. They're always thinking of the next election and what they're doing, and this kind of squabbling that they were doing in the Congress this recently is, something you really wouldn't want the people of the world to observe, and it's just partisan nonsense.
Yeah.
Because these huge issues are nonpartisan.
I think the best thing is if everybody got together and just voted all of them out at one time, they would start getting the idea that that's not the way we're wanting to go.
Well, absolutely. Or better still, to change the laws and survive some of them, which they would deserve to do if they changed the laws before it was too late. And I think they should change the laws this year before Christmas. Give everybody a nice Christmas present.
Now, that would be excellent.
Because
I'm for that.
the United States government, the Congress, has the right to print money. That's called sovereignty. It came down from antiquity. You have the right to do it, but you don't do it. Lincoln was the last man that did it. And if he hadn't done it, you would have been worse off financially today than you are. But somehow there was a secret meeting in Jekyll Island put together by 4 or 5 of the major New York bankers, and they decided to draft a legislation which they presented to Congress and was turned down at first because it was sponsored by a senator and they didn't like that. And then they redrafted it and got it through, and that was the beginning of the Federal Reserve System, which has been the bane of the existence of both the United States and the world for 99 years now. And immediately after it was passed, and the President of the United States and the leader of the opposition both said it was the worst thing they'd ever done. But 99 years have gone by and nobody's done anything about it. So you have to ask what congressmen and congress ladies are doing to earn their pay when they allow something as outrageous as this to go on for 99 years without saying it was absolutely totally wrong and we're going to set it right because the future history of the world depends on it.
We've got Ron Paul, who has been trying to have the Federal Reserve audited for years, and of course Fed's like, oh, you can't touch us.
He's been trying to get it audited. He hasn't succeeded yet, has he?
Well, no, because the media is pretending he doesn't exist. They're literally, because the mainstream media here, or lamestream media, as the smart people call them, are now government controlled and bank controlled. So since Ron Paul is the only person who's actually thinking for the American people and for the Constitution of the United States of America, as opposed to lobbyists, the government, and such like that, they're all terrified. So they try and just pretend he doesn't exist, even when he wins straw polls.
He's got the problem figured out, right? I don't think he's got the solution. You can read about that sort of thing in the red website I mentioned. But, the press is to a large extent controlled. And if you read this book, Web of Debt, that I've recommended to you by Ellen Brown, she explains how the Morgan Bank, years and years and years ago, not long after the Fed was established, decided that they would have to get control of the U.S. press. So they got somebody to pick out the 25 most powerful papers in the United States and got control of them. And my suspicion, which I express in the speech that I referred to, is that the Bilderbergers, as we call them, these are one of the groups that are running the world today. Oh, yeah. Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission, they're all together and hooked up with a small cabal in the armed forces and the CIA and so on. And they're the ones that are running the world today. And you get the very strong suspicion that they control the press through the Rupert Murdochs of this world and others, and just get out there the information and the point of view they want and really squash anything else that you try to get out that might refute their point of view.
I'm very anti-Bilderberg. I'm very impressed that Alex Jones has videos of them protesting outside their meetings and videotaping foreign dignitaries and American politicians who are unlawfully attending the meeting because they're not allowed to unless they're permitted by Congress openly. And
which meetings are these referring to?
The Bilderberg Group meetings.
Yeah,
and how they've selected the last. Huh?
You say they're not allowed to attend?
There's a law. I can't remember the name of the law, but there's a law that prohibits American politicians, certainly congressmen and certainly presidents, from meeting with foreign dignitaries under certain circumstances. The Bilderberg Group is very much not one of those circumstances. So anytime an American politician attends those meetings, like Barack Obama and Clinton, the last 4 or 5 presidents have all been elected by the Bilderberg Group. They've been selected.
I would be very interested in knowing about that law if you can find it and you can send it to me. Just in general purposes, because all of our senior politicians nearly have gone there at one time or another too.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up.
The problem is that they take an oath not to report what goes on there, and a few of your major newspapers have done the same thing. which doesn't speak very well for the freedom of the press.
True. Now, with all the big banks around the United States, the world that kind of controls everything, what is the World Bank and how does that work?
Well, the World Bank was set up from the Bretton Woods meeting in 1944 in New Hampshire. And its original purpose it was called the Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And it was to help poor countries by lending them money to do, build dams and this sort of thing. Well, it did some of that. The problem is it got too enthusiastic, and it got to be too easy for them to lend money. And it was like putting children in a candy shop. And it got them so far into debt that they couldn't really pay the interest on the debt. Well, then when Paul Volcker adopted the ideas of Milton Friedman and brought on that terrible recession, 80-81, these countries that could barely stay alive, paying 5% interest, all of a sudden had to pay 18% interest, and they couldn't possibly do it. So what happened was Volcker persuaded the big New York banks, especially when some South American countries were about to default on their bonds, to lend them more money to pay the interest on what they already owed until he could get the International Monetary Fund to come to the rescue with taxpayers' money, which he subsequently did. Well, that worked so well in South America that they later did it in Southeast Asia. And they always talk about the IMF rushing in to save the country. Well, I was going to say baloney. There it slipped out. They don't go in to save the country. They go in to save the international banks that have lent money to those countries and to provide them with the money to get their interest and principal out of the countries. And that's what it's doing. Well, then what happened was the IMF ran out of money. So they persuaded, they being probably the people that run the world, and certainly the United States Treasury was deeply involved right into its years in getting the World Bank to come to the rescue. So in effect, they were both doing the same kind of things. But I think something that your listeners might be interested in is that when the IMF or the World Bank went into these places, not only did they not go in to help the people, they set very strict rules on how those people could run their own affairs. In effect, they took away their democratic rights. Just that's the sum of it in one sentence. They took away their democratic rights. If they had public assets, they had to sell them. They had to cut back on services. They had to cut back on employment. They had to do a lot of things that were bad for their people in order to pay the interest on the loans to the international banks. And the big recession in Southeast Asia, for example, they called it the IMF recession. And they're still doing it today. They were doing it with Greece. And instead of giving Greece the tools that it needs to get back on its feet, they imposed regulations which resulted in lower unemployment, at least higher unemployment, rather, and consequently lower tax revenues, and consequently greater deficits. And that does not solve the problem. In other words, they're just going at it backwards in order to solve the problems of the big banks. It's their problems to try and get the money back once they had lent it to these countries. And it's the same thing with the United States. That's the real problem now, that the United States has borrowed so much money from the banking system that there's no way that you can ever pay it back. There's no way to pay it back because the money doesn't exist. And there's only, a handful of real legal tender existing. So that debt can't be repaid unless, and maybe part of it could, if the United States went back to the experience of Lincoln and started printing some greenbacks and using them to pay for infrastructure and to bail out the states who are in terrible trouble, and to provide services to provide employment. and do these things. But that is the big revolution in the system that we're really talking about, and that has to take place. Because until the United States starts printing money and using it without borrowing it from the banks, you're in deep, deep trouble, and getting in deeper trouble all the time. In one of my books going back about 10 or 15 years, I plotted out what your debt would be in 20 years or something like that, going the way it was. And of course, it's happening. And it will continue to happen, and it will just get so high that it will be impossible for you to pay the interest on it. And then what's going to happen? So that's sort of where you're headed, and you've got to reverse the direction, and you've got to reverse it very, very soon if you don't want to have a lot more trouble than you've got now. And you know, these things that are happening overseas, when the people get upset and attack each other, attack the governments and so on, underlying it is this combination of fear and hopelessness, because they look at the future and they say, what's in the future? There's no jobs. And even if you're better educated, you can't get a job. So they take to the streets, protest. And of course, that means bringing out the police or the army, and the situation just gets worse and worse. So we've got some big problems on our hands, and we're going to need some very strong leadership driven by what I would hope would be an American spring, a Canadian spring. In other words, the people rising up and saying, hey, we want some action, we want it now, we don't want any more talk, and we don't want any more quibbling, we don't want any more partisan bickering, we want these problems solved by everybody working together and getting the show back on the road.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems that we have. Everybody wants to go party this and party that instead of working together as an American for the people of America.
Absolutely, you've put your finger right on it, and it's not the right solution at the moment.
That's true. Well, that's what's got us into it.
You know, one other thing on the banking system, a lot of people don't understand the myth that the banks like to create, that if you go into your bank tomorrow to borrow some money, say to buy a car or something, that they're going to lend you the money that I deposited today. Well, that's not true. It wouldn't be true in one case out of a million. They create the money out of nothing to lend to you.
And just put it on paper.
The way the system works is this. You go into the bank, see your friendly banker, say I need $35,000 to buy a car. And he or she will say, well, what collateral do you have? Do you have some bonds or stocks? And if you say no, and what about a second mortgage on your house or your cottage? And if you've got that, fine. If you haven't, you say, what about the co-signature from your rich mother-in-law or someone? And finally, when you get collateral that suits them, they ask you to sign a note, or well, it used to be anyway, prime plus a certain amount, depending on the color of your eyes. And then they punch their computer keys, and presto, the $35,000 appears in your account. And you can go out and spend it. And seconds earlier, that money did not exist. It was created out of thin air. And the way the banks make their money is that if you decided to leave your $35,000 in until the new models come out because you thought they were going to be better, you would probably only get zero interest, or maybe 1/8 of 1% or something like that against the 3, 4, or 5 that you're paying on your note. And that is called the spread. And that's where the banks make their money. So the more money they can loan, the more money they can create, the more debt that they can create and lend to people that have to repay it with interest, the more money they make and the bigger bonuses they can pay.
I do have a question here from Mammon in the chat room, and we'll throw this in here real quick before we take a break. He wants to know, what's the sole purpose of Codex Alimentarius, and how does that tie into the global scheme?
Well, I'll have to be honest and say it's something I used to know off by heart, but this is really foreign exchange system, and it's used to exchange from one currency into another. And I think maybe I better not try and go into it at any length, because my mind is just a little vague on the exact details, and I don't want to mislead anybody and give an answer that isn't absolutely correct.
Okay, that sounds excellent. I still have more questions, but I think what we'll do is take us a quick break and let everybody get something to drink, stretch your legs for a few minutes. And we'll still talk some more about the financial and stuff when we come back for a few minutes before we go into some of the other stuff. Craig, you want to take us out for a break?
I sure will. You are listening to The Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. We will be right back.
Don't go away. The Paranormal View will be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View right here on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to again thank everybody for listening tonight, not just in the chat room, but from around the world also. I mean, if you're not here with us in chat, you can do so by coming over to para-x.com. Click on the live chat button at the top of the page, and you'll be in with all these wonderful people. And we do have people listening from all around the world. Tonight we got people listening from Ireland, U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, Finland, and the one marked other. We have 3 of those. Who knows? That's probably somewhere from outer space. So appreciate it and welcome everybody. So we are talking tonight with Paul Hellyer, and I want to continue with the financial banking system and the fraud that's going on with that. With the different nations on the verge of financial collapse, what is the answer for the world?
Well, the answer for the world is the same one that I said the United States had to follow. Every sovereign government in the world has to start printing part, at least, of the money that it needs to operate. Some of my monetary reformer friends think that governments should print all of the money that's needed to add to the money supply each year. In my book, in both books, The Miracle in Waiting, which is the one on economics, and Light at the End of the Tunnel, a survival plan for the human species, I take a slightly more moderate view for reasons which I explain there, that if governments even printed 34% of the new money that comes into existence every year, that they would have enough money to balance their budgets at every level, the federal, the state, and the municipal level, without going into any further into debt. And of course, getting the bank reserves, which is where the money would have to go, getting bank reserves, cash reserves up to 34% would allow them to reduce some of the existing debt at the same time, while getting the system running and putting people back to work and really going to a normal economic system. Again, when I mean normal, I mean a good one. I don't mean the one that goes up and down with recessions and depressions all the time. So I have said that we probably need a reflation, because we have to get more money into the system. I didn't explain that banks create money as debt, but when they call a loan, they extinguish money. And it's just as if they took dollar bills and shoveled them into a furnace. The money disappears. That's what happened to trillions of dollars with the latest recession. So there is a tremendous deficit in purchasing power worldwide, in the United States and in Ireland and in Canada and Sweden and everywhere. So the suggestion is that all sovereign countries would have to start printing a substantial part of their money, and I think 34% would do it. But I mean, I'm not wedded to that, but that would be a good start, and it would end recessions and depressions and get us on an even keel on a permanent basis. And it would give us enough money, enough financial flexibility to start, to start doing something about global warming, which is the most serious problem facing the world. And the only problem would be in a situation like Europe, where they have a central bank for all of the people in the European Union. What they would have to do is have the European Central Bank print a lot of money and give it to the various governments on a pro rata basis, on a per person basis, and spread it around that way. And it would be a lot of money, but it would be absolutely necessary in order to get the system going and to put governments back in the position where they can pay their debts without having to increase taxes or cut back on services and all the crazy things they're doing now. Might interest listeners to know that the policies being pursued at the moment are exactly the same ones that were pursued in the 1930s, right after the crash of 1929. And the rich people then are saying the same thing as the rich people now. Cut back services, fire a lot of people, raise taxes a little bit, and that's the way you solve a recession. Well, it didn't solve the recession of the Depression of the 1930s. It had its ups and downs, but it really lasted until the war started. And then they started printing money in earnest and lending it to governments or creating it for governments to fight the war. And they were financing both sides, as a matter of fact, which is not a very good thing to have done. So it has to be a universal change in the process, not just in one country. A country like the United States could start it, do it on its own, but as soon as one country started it, then others will follow suit as sure as anything, because it's in their own best interest and it is the only solution. And eventually, when they understand what is involved, they will adopt it because it makes sense and nothing else does.
Well, now, if all the countries started just printing all the money, does that cause inflation?
No, but this is probably the biggest myth that the banking cartel use. They say it would be inflationary. Well, they're wrong, because it's the amount of money that's created that determines prices, not who creates it. It doesn't make any difference whether it's created by the private banks or the government, if the amount is the right amount. And of course, the difference is one way you have to pay it back and the other way you don't. I think what they're presuming, of course, is that if government started printing money, that they would allow the banks to use a multiplier factor. And as a matter of fact, I'm proposing 3 to 1. But a high multiplier factor, of course, would be inflationary. But if the banks have to keep that money on reserve as cash or on deposit with the central bank, then it's not inflationary. And there's a perfect example that nobody ever talks about. That's the Guernsey Islands. They have been printing all of the money that they used for public infrastructure, for docks and markets and all of that sort of thing for 200 years. And what's their situation today? Okay, full employment, no debt. I didn't say small debt, no debt. And getting along just fine, thank you very much. Perfect example. The banks tried their damnedest to keep them from doing it and to get them to stop it, but they've been doing it for 2 centuries now, and it has worked perfectly, and it would work just as well, provided, of course, and this is really the reason I wouldn't want governments to print all of the money, providing you don't get mad people, lunatics, heading governments,
I think it's a little late for that.
Well, they're more that way in some countries than others. But as long as you don't get somebody that tries to print so much money, they're in effect bribing the people with their own money, and that would be the risk if politicians created all the money. And the reason that I'm not for letting them do 100%. I think there has to be a check and balance there. Present banking system employs a lot of people. It's a big industry. What we've got to do is to take away its right to run the world and to take away democratic rights from countries and to, in effect, decide on the future of people from one corner of the earth to the other, which is the way they're doing things now.
Now, I do have another question here from Mammon in the chat room, and he wants to know, do you know anything about the debtor camps they are building in the U.S.?
The answer is I've heard about it on the internet, and that's all I know about it.
I think if they tried stuff like that, there'd be a big uprising.
The trouble is, so the media is not reporting on that kind of stuff because their masters are saying, "Oh, don't tell anybody about that."
Right.
You talk about an uprising, but the problem is, and I go back to the Great Depression, our famous mounted police were used against the poor guys who were riding in the railroads because they had no money to get from one place to another, and we did have a riot as a result of it. That when things get tough, as they're beginning to do again, people take extraordinary measures, and that's when the people with power at the present time, the cabal and the banking cartel and the politicians they control, call out either the police or the army or both.
Now, if the United States kept on the course that it's going, because they're already like 14 trillion in debt, and they aren't really doing anything to try to resolve that. But if they kept going on that path and we ended up having total collapse, what would take place in the United States?
Well, you need a crystal ball to answer that question. I certainly wouldn't want to be in the middle of government at that time. My crystal ball isn't working tonight. So I'm going to take the Fifth Amendment.
Well, now,
I'm just curious, Mr. Hellyer, based on your knowledge of the subject, have you read the book The Creature from Jekyll Island?
Yes, I have indeed.
Yeah,
and it's well worth reading. And it, of course, tells you all about the origins of the Federal Reserve System. And it's a good read. Ellen Brown in her book tells some of it cribbed from The Creature from Jekyll Island. Both books are recommended on the website that I was telling you about, www.victoryfortheworld.net.
Now, is Canada in debt like the rest of the countries?
The answer is yes, but not as desperately. We are at the present time one of the fortunate few, as we keep telling ourselves and others. Our government likes to brag about it, but in my opinion, it's more good luck than good management. We have more debt than we should have, and but it's only about 40. The deficit now is only about 40 billion, and we could get out of it probably in 3 or 4 or 5 years on the course that we're on, which is not really a good one for the young people coming out of university who can't find jobs and so on. But it's a very unsatisfactory solution. And the interesting thing to me, and I don't want to elaborate on this too much, but we have our central bank is publicly owned. Unlike the Fed, which is privately owned, ours is publicly owned, and it's supposed to be working for the shareholders, who are the Canadian people. Well, we used to do that from 1939 to 1974, and then I guess our governor was invited to a meeting of the Bank for International Settlements. This is probably the most secretive of the three sort of I don't know exactly what to call, but compliant organizations. There's the IMF, the World Bank, and the Bank for International Settlements. They are all either directly or indirectly under the control of the international banking cartel. So our governor went there and came back with this, having adopted the ideas of Milton Friedman along with the rest of the world, that resulted in this terrible recession that we had in 81, 82, and then another one 10 years later. And lo and behold, until then, they had been lending money to the Canadian government at near net zero cost from 1939 to 1974. And they stopped doing that, presumably, because at the Bank of International Settlements, the banking cartel laid the law down and said, this is what we want you to do, and we no longer want you to provide cheap financing for your governments. And, that was sort of the beginning, and it's been downhill ever since. World production's been down since, and debts have been going up, and things have just not been as good since we adopted the open system, the sort of let the industry run itself ideas of Milton Friedman, who incidentally was a very inconsistent fellow. He was at one time somebody who said that the bank should have 100 cents in the dollar as cash reserves, because he had learned that from his mentors, Lloyd Mintz and others, at the original Chicago school in the 1930s. But then he said that's politically impossible, which I kind of think it is. So maybe he was right on that. So he went to the other extreme and said the banks didn't have to have any cash reserves. And that's what our country has. It was enacted into law in 1991 by the conservative government of the day. And why someone would go from 100% to 0% without stopping in between anywhere, I really don't know. In my opinion, it was very bad judgment, and it got us off to a bad start, which has cost us, well, incredibly. It is really sort of the mother idea of everything that's gone wrong in the last 20 or 30 years.
Now, Mr. Hellyer, I have a question for you, and Jordan in the chat room was just talking about this. One of the biggest financial problems in the last few years is the rising cost of fuel. In your opinion, who do you think is behind that, and what can be done to take care of this problem?
Well, this may lead into other things. If the fuel system is the whole global oil business is controlled by a very small group of people. And it just happens to be the same people that control the international banking cartel. And they've got lots of money if they want to speculate in oil futures. And so they do some pretty peculiar things. And it's very interesting in our country. I don't know if it's the same in the US. The oil prices all go up exactly the same amount on Friday morning and come down the same amount the following Tuesday. And they call this a market system. But it's funny that they have to telephone call to every individual gas outlet and tell them what the price is going to be on that day. It just happens like magic. So they do in effect. It's become a world oligopoly. And they have a tremendous influence in setting prices. Sure, they put them up and down with the price of crude oil, but even there, they're the ones that have the primary control over the price of crude oil. So the extraordinary power. But where it leads us, however, is there are alternate fuels available. And we should be introducing those now, not 20 years from now. Our leaders are talking about reducing fossil fuel emissions by a certain amount in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. In 20 years, it's going to be too late. In 30 years, it's going to be too much later. It's got to happen now. And as a matter of fact, it should have happened by now. But in my book, I said, maybe we've got 10 years. Maybe if we started tomorrow with a world mobilization, we've got 10 years to switch from an oil economy to a clean fuel economy. And that's where two things arise. First of all, today we couldn't afford it. Nation states haven't got the money. And we have to change the monetary system so they'll have the money to do it. And secondly, I suspect that these same people, whoever they are, also control a lot of the new exotic fuels, some of them that have been developed in the bowels of the earth and in the western United States by scientists working in cooperation with the extraterrestrials there. And I know as long ago as 10 years or more, whistleblowers were saying that they had developed both cold fusion and zero-point energy, but just nothing is ever said about it. And it's not getting out. And in my book, I mentioned the number of secret patents that have been filed in the last few decades. Enormous. And if you could get your hand on those and find out what's in them, I'm sure you could find all kinds of things that would benefit the humankind incredibly. But they're all locked up there. And you have to ask, why are they locked up? Who's benefiting? And in the case of the energy, it is the owners of the oil industry. And they obviously want to cash in on the trillions of dollars of oil assets they've got worldwide before they start dabbling in exotic energy. And I guess if you were interested in nothing but money, that would be a smart move. But if it's the future of the world that is really at stake, to do that is one of the most immoral things that I can think of. In other words, people would put money, monopoly playing, ahead of the future viability of the world as a happy habitat for the human species. Yeah, incredible. So we somehow, and that's just one more thing that we have to unlock, because the two big secrets of the world are one, the monetary system and how it works and who controls it, and the other one is the extraterrestrial presence and technology, which is very, very closely held and which we should find out about, and especially we should find out about the energy components and whether they are the ones that are going to solve our problems. And if they're not, I think they are, but if they're not, I know that the extraterrestrials would give us the technology if we just stop shooting at them and start cooperating for a better cosmos.
Making bad movies about them.
Oh, yeah. With that, I want to go on over into all the UFO, alien, and extraterrestrial technology. You first read a book by Colonel Philip Corso, author of The Day After Roswell. And when you read that book, what was it in the book that sparked your interest in UFOs?
Well, if I could go back just a little bit from that, the reason I had the book was because I have a person in Ottawa, Pierre Junot, a young French-speaking Canadian, who was sending me things about the extraterrestrials for probably a couple of years or 3 years. And he was very patient with me because I told him I haven't got time to read that stuff. I had a very busy schedule. And he was very patient with me and kept sending me stuff. He asked me to watch the ABC special Peter Jennings put together, the 2-hour special. And I was very impressed by that, as a matter of fact. And even despite the little bit of debunking at the end to satisfy somebody, heaven only knows who, I said, these policemen and pilots, both civil and military, they're not lying. They're telling the truth. And so that had an impression on me. But going back to the book, he sent me this book called The Day After Roswell. And I said to myself, well, that would make an interesting read. Sometime when I've got time to read. And as a matter of fact, about the only time I ever have is during a week or so at our place in the lake where I am at the moment. And so I decided I would take it the following year. The following year I couldn't find it. Then the year after that, I was looking for another book, and there it was, staring me in the face. So I took it along and started reading, and it was absolutely fascinating. About halfway through, I said, this stuff is real, because I recognized the names of the generals and the bases that he was talking about. The year before, when I was looking for it, I read The Life of Pi. I don't know if you've ever read that or not, but it's a very cleverly constructed fiction. And so I said, well, is this another Life of Pi? And the answer came clear, loud and clear, no, this is not another Life of Pi. This is serious business. So interestingly enough, a nephew of mine came along and said, what are you reading? I told him. And he said, well, I'm a skeptic. Well, I said, that's okay. It's a free country. You can be a skeptic if you want to. He went home, and a couple of days later, he phoned me and said, I phoned the general and told him what you were reading, and he said every word was true and more. Where can I get a copy of the book? So I told him. Well, it just happened that about a week before I went up there for the holiday, I had been given an invitation to speak at a convocation at the University of Toronto. I had absolutely no idea of accepting because ufology is not my business. I didn't know anything about it. And so I thought it would be something that I shouldn't even consider accepting. After I finished the book, I said, there are issues here of such a profound magnitude affecting not only the people of the United States, but the people of the world, that we've got to get them out in the open and talk about them. I said, we can't talk about them if the official position of the United States is they don't exist. So I decided I should go public. Interestingly enough, I was getting married a week later to the day, and I had to check with my future bride. Incidentally, she was the widow of my best friend ever, and she and her late husband had been part of a foursome with my late wife and myself. So we knew each other well and were good friends. But I told her it would just be a one-off shot, which was probably the biggest miscalculation I've ever made. And she reluctantly agreed that I could do it. Before doing it, though, I phoned the general because I had met him at an air display, and he had been given a heads up that I was going to call. And as soon as we connected, he said, every word is true and more. And I know, he's not talking about every word literally, because I don't know that there's ever been a book written where you couldn't find something wrong with it. But the essence of it was true, and that there was a crash at Roswell. Some of us now think there were two, and that the wreckage was picked up, and back engineering was begun by officials immediately, and it's been going on ever since. So with that assurance, and incidentally, he told me at the same time that there had been face-to-face meetings between United States officials and the extraterrestrials themselves. With that assurance, I decided to go public, because by then I was absolutely convinced that UFOs were real. There was no doubt in my mind whatsoever, and of course, there's certainly no doubt now.
Now, there's a couple different people that you talked about in some of your books and speakings. Who is Wilbert Smith?
Well, Wilbert Smith is an early Canadian ufologist who worked at one of the Canadian federal government departments that I later became minister of. He had retired just before I went there, but and I knew nothing of him, so that, in the early days of my interest in this subject, if somebody mentioned Wilbert Smith, I didn't know any more about him than the man on the street would. But eventually I got a copy of the top secret memo that he had written to his boss at the university, at the Department of Transport in Ottawa, asking for permission to do certain experiments to try and check out certain characteristics of the UFOs and to connect their characteristics with the basic research that he and his colleagues were doing at the Department of Transport. And the four things in that memo that stick out. One was that UFOs are real, and there was no equivocation there. It was just UFOs are real, period. The United States government takes this very, very seriously. The classification is the highest in the US, higher than the H-bomb. And a small group of scientists headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush are already checking to try and determine the method of propulsion and other characteristics of the craft that was located. So this goes back to the 1950s. And that isn't imaginary stuff, that was real stuff. So obviously the United States government, despite its denial of its interest and some of its professional debunkers, has been working full tilt on back engineering all aspects of the alien technology and using material from crashes. There have been many, many of them, as you know. I went to a conference in Las Vegas 3 or 4 years ago, bought a book from Mr. Ryan, who had, I think, listed 85 crashes. And some of them were better documented than others, but some of them were very well documented. And even if you took half of them, that's a lot of crashes. And the United States government had certainly, in my opinion, retrieved most of the craft that were discussed there. So you can imagine what can happen in 60 years with some of the best minds in the world, or the most educated minds anyway, and hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, developing the technology, learning about it, and trying to adapt it either for similar craft or for the development of weapons and so on. And I think, and this is speculation, but it's speculation based on talking to a lot of people, that if and when the truth is out, that what they have achieved in those 60 years will be so mind-boggling that it will just, people will find it difficult to believe because it's got science fiction beaten by quite a bit.
Now, with the back engineering that you're talking about and stuff, I guess Area 52 is one of the places 51. Where they're supposed to do, Area 51, 52, 51, anywhere around in there is close. But there was a guy supposedly who spilled the beans on a lot of that, and that was Bob Lazar. Have you heard of him, and do you believe the things that he was saying?
I have heard of him. I've read some of the things that he's put on the net, and I guess the answer to your question is I have no reason to disbelieve him. And if I was choosing sides, I would say that he's probably telling the truth. And there are others in the same category. Of course, everybody who starts talking as he has is likely to be subject to the debunkers because, as we all know, the United States government still hasn't decided that this is stuff that the people can handle.
True. I know I used to work with one of his nephews, and I talked to him quite a bit about it, and he was saying that everything that Bob had said was true, but they also considered him like the black sheep of the family.
Well, I guess they can say that about a lot of us. If you stick your neck out too far, why, you either get it cut off or you're a black sheep or something.
That's true. That's true. I think what we'll do is take us another quick break and come back, and we'll finish up pretty much on through without another one. If you guys got questions, feel free to private chat them to Craig, Jeffrey, or myself. And if you're listening from around the world somewhere other than here at ParaX, You can come over to para-x.com, click on the live chat button at the top of the page, and you'll be in with all these wonderful people, and you'll also be able to ask questions of our guest, Paul Hellyer. I think, Jeff, why don't you take us out? Probably about 7-8 minutes, something like that.
Okay, well, you're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with our awesome guest author, UFO expert, and former Canadian Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer. And so tune in, so we'll start talking about UFOs and Area 52s and such like that.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View right here on the Para-X Radio Network. We want to thank everyone for being here tonight and from around the world listening to us. We appreciate each and every one. Tonight, right after our show, stay on and listen to Joe and Tara from Visions Magazine Radio. Tonight, Joe and Tara has Tara's undisclosed 14-minute EVP overnight session, run unedited, and breaking points with Gary Kanji's analysis. So stay tuned. That'll be coming up right after the Paranormal View. Getting back to UFOs, because we're down to the last about 40 minutes now. So we was talking about Bob Lazar, and personally, I believe everything that he was saying. The government kind of put everything out there to, I guess, make it look like he had no clue about anything and that he was lying about everything. But I think they do that to misinformation again, which they do on a lot of stuff like that. There's a place called the CFB Sheffield. What is that?
I think you're talking about a huge military establishment in Western Canada, which has been used for many purposes over the years, and which they used to test a huge detonation of dynamite, 10,000 tons or something like that, to simulate the effect of a small atomic bomb. And what you're probably leading to is that allegedly it was made available as a landing spot for UFOs at one stage, although I have no personal knowledge of that.
Yeah, that was, I just seen that written in there, or that it was purported to be that.
Once I went public, of course, what happened, that I started getting information from all over the world, and people sent me documents of all kinds, some that had been quite highly classified, and books of all kinds. I probably got, I don't know, maybe 24 books, and I read nearly all of them. And they're, fascinating stuff. And I was briefed by a whole list of people. Dr. Stephen Greer was one of the first. He gave me a 3-hour briefing. And I saw him not long ago. I went to Washington to meet with him. And he had a former U.S. Naval Intelligence officer there who, without breaking any secrets, really confirmed some of the more spectacular things that have been accomplished in the course of the last 50 years or 60 years. And for me, these experiences are not just new revelations. They're more in the nature of confirmation of information that I have picked up from various sources, and that you have to sift the wheat from the chaff and decide what is real and what isn't. And I have had quite a lot of opportunity to do that sort of thing. One of the first people I met after I went public was a chap by the name of Nick Pope, who was the ET desk officer for the United Kingdom Department of Defense. And I stopped and visited him on my way to the Middle East 5 years ago when I was on an exploratory tour there, and he gave me the reference of Colonel Charles Halt, the Bentwaters case. I'm sure you're familiar with that. One of the most interesting. And he said he thought the colonel would see me if I asked him. So I wrote him, and the colonel said he didn't usually respond to correspondence of that kind, but with Nick's recommendation, he would see me. So I went and had lunch with him and recorded about 2 hours worth of stuff. And I put a lot of that in my book. My book, Light at the End of the Tunnel, Survival Plan for the Human Species, is not about UFOs. It's about what has gone wrong in the world, who's pulling the strings, and what has to be done about it. But it has a very long chapter called We Are Not Alone in the Cosmos. And it provides a good primer on the subject of the extraterrestrials and their technology, so that if you have people that are agnostics or really aren't into the subject and you want to sort of get them in slowly, if you could get them to read that book and read that chapter, that would be a good place for them to start. And then they could go from there and read some of the books that I have referred to in the glossary. But in my chat with Colonel Halt, which I have reproduced in the book and at considerable length because it went through the whole thing, the sightings, the denials, the scoffing, and then more sightings, and Colonel Halt being told to go out and find out what was going on and saying that he was determined to go out there and put an end to this nonsense once and for all. Well, instead of that, it changed his life forever, because he ran right face to face into the whole phenomenon and some really extraordinary aspects of his experience. And he didn't intend to make it public, but there was a document that fell into somebody's hands, and it got into the press, and that led to him having to explain the story in greater length. And he told me all of the things that happened of documents disappearing, and of talking to colleagues who were in the intelligence business who all of a sudden didn't know anything. And that's the reason I put so much of it in, is because it sort of leads you through the whole process of denial and fact, and then denial and so on. And I think it's a very interesting story. Two other things I put in later on. I went to this crash retrieval conference in Las Vegas to see if any of the presenters had information that I didn't know about. And of course, there's always something new, which is very interesting. But I took advantage of the opportunity to, while I was out there, to talk to a couple of abductees, because I wanted to include a little bit about that in my book. And the first one was Travis Walton, and he and his wife came to Las Vegas to spend the weekend there at my request. We spent a lot of time together, and I listened to his story, and I thought to myself, well, this man is not lying either. The other one was Jim Sparks. Jim Sparks has been abducted probably more than any other person, and had the added advantage of being conscious in most cases, and picking up a lot of information, far, far more than most people who are really not in a position to remember very much of what happened to them, except through hypnosis. And Jim had a very, very interesting section reporting the concern that the ETs have for the way we're running our planet. They think we're running it into the ground.
I have to agree with them.
Pardon me?
Yeah, really.
I said I have to agree with them.
Yeah, well, absolutely. In one case, a mass abduction, they showed pictures, like moving pictures of pristine rivers, and lakes and clean snow on the mountains and heavily forested mountains and so on. And then the next picture was of bloated fish floating down the rivers and mountains black and bare, clear cutting. And it was a contrast. And the picture really was, you people are doing yourselves in, and you're going to have to do something about it and do it very quickly. And they gave him some advice. He allowed me to print a fairly lengthy abstract from his book and mine of their most valuable advice, and especially relating to disclosure. They said that you're going to have to grant amnesty. And the reason is really obvious if you stop to think about it. If you set up a commission right away, and some people are afraid that too much information would come out all at once, but I'm not. By the time they got organized and started, you get some pretty bland stuff at the beginning, just as is happening with the UK revelations. All the stuff that's coming out so far is really kindergarten stuff. And they haven't really released the more important things yet. By the time you got to the good stuff, you'd be talking to people who, in many cases, have committed technical crimes against the United States or against its criminal laws or against its Constitution and so on. And there would be a reluctance, certainly I would be reluctant if I were one of them, to want to tell the truth if I thought I was going to spend a few years in jail. So the ETs told Sparks to pass the word that there should be either the act that prohibits them from telling the truth should be repealed, or a total amnesty granted so that they can get it out and let us know what they're doing without fear of spending the rest of their lives behind bars. So I have been satisfied with this. Well, then over the years, more and more information just keeps coming along. I have a good friend, Paula Harris. I'm sure, have you had her on your show?
No.
Well, she'd be a good one to get on. She's very knowledgeable. She's one of the best ufologists, reporters, investigators, and so she would be someone to get on, I think, if you can get her. And she has introduced me to a lot of good stories. One, of course, related to the Vatican with her relationship with Monsignor Balducci, and how even though the Vatican had been one of the organizations that had been very reluctant for the United States to come clean on the UFO file, that now they've been bringing it out in the open for the last couple of years, including the Pope himself, and obviously preparing all of us for the revelations to come. So they're withdrawing their objections and getting us ready for something new and very revealing, and saying it's just natural that God would, if he would create people here on Earth, would have created people in other parts of the cosmos as well. One of the news stories that, two news stories that Paula broke in the last year or two are both worth recounting. The first had to do with the tall whites. And I don't know if you've talked much about the tall whites on your show or not.
No.
Are they similar to the Nordics?
They are different from the Nordics, yes.
So obviously they'd be different than the Greys.
And very obviously different from the Greys, very different. And she broke a story by talking to Charles Hall. This is an important distinction. Charles Halt is Brentwater's. Charles Hall is a retired United States airman who worked on the gunnery and bombing range in Nevada. I think it's in Area 51. I'm not just exactly sure, down at the south end there. And he was a meteorologist. He was also an intelligence officer at some stage, but he was a meteorologist who managed to build up a personal relationship with the tall whites. And of course, he explains how he was scared out of his wits, and how the other meteorologists had been too, and most of them wouldn't go into the desert. But he had a special responsibility because he was fearless, and he went out and he helped save the daughter of one of the tall whites, and she happened to be a big wheel, so he became known as Teacher's Pet. And he had a special relationship both with the Pentagon and with the tall whites. He's written a series of books called Millennial Hospitality. I think it's Millennial Hospitality 1, 2, 3, and 4. I haven't read all 4, but the one that I read was very interesting because it shows you the problems of interaction when you see people operating very differently than you do, and being able to ride across the desert at high speeds and do all of this sort of thing, and have their scout cars there. And he claims that much of the scout cars were manufactured and assembled in America, and then the mothership came in once a month, the time of the full moon, and went into a huge hangar on the side of the mountain. And these people lived, some of them to be 800 years old. They've been around for quite a while. I can't remember if he told me how long he thought they'd been around or not, but they've been around for quite a while. As far as we know, they're still there. But the important thing, I think, was that they had been exchanging information, exchanging technology with the United States Air Force in the 1960s. Well, that's a long while ago. And that just underlines the extent of probably what has been happening in the last few decades. It's a good read to get one of his books and find out about that species if you're
Believe
interested.
me, I've already looked them up. I'm going to be putting the links on your report page here as recommended. Wow.
And there's another disclosure that Paula made not too long ago of a crash in 1945 in New Mexico. And this was 2 years before Roswell. And she located the two men who had been boys at the time, who had gone there. They lived there, and saw the crash, went to look at it close up. One of them actually went inside the vehicle, and they're going back and forth to it whenever they could. And then a rather fascinating story at the end, that a captain of the United States, I think it was a captain, United States Army, came along and asked the father of one permission to take down his fences so they could bring the big trucks in to remove the vehicle. And would you believe they referred to it as a meteorological balloon? And where have you heard that before?
Yeah, Roswell.
Of course, the same. Yeah. And here's 2 years gone by, and they couldn't even think up anything better in 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
They got much more sophisticated later on. When they got rid of Blue Book, they started to get very sophisticated. I was reading something, in the introduction to Stan Friedman's book about an observation somewhere off one of the mountains in western U.S., and the debunker said that it was due to the snow blowing off the mountains and the sun shining on the snow.
That caused it to look that way.
So some of the things that were said, by way of rebuttal, are just so absolutely incredibly stupid.
Right.
That you wonder what they take us for. And I guess better not to try and answer that question. But it was a very interesting read. And if you look up Paula Harris's site, her latest book recounts the story of the crash of 1945 in New Mexico and the story of these two boys. And again, a very good read and sort of puts you into the picture of things happening even before the sort of official, unofficial history of the business started. Of course, there was supposedly a crash in the South Pacific way back then that the Navy salvaged, and that's how they got involved to such a very large extent in the very early stages.
Now, what is the difference? And I'm just now finding out that there's, I guess, different species and races of the aliens. What is the difference between the tall whites, the grays, and the others? I mean, are they some good, some bad?
Well, I mentioned 6 species in my book, and the tall whites is not one of them, so that would be 7. One of the interesting people I met early on, after I had gone public, was Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut.
Right.
And he was coming to Toronto to speak and asked, about meeting me. So he had a mutual friend, and the mutual friend told me of his interest, and my wife offered to make dinner for Edgar and his escort. And we had a fascinating time. I won't tell you all the details of his late arrival, airplane having to turn around just about over Toronto Airport and go back to Chicago because windshield cracked. So that certainly held them up, made them a little late for dinner.
Oh, yeah.
We managed to cope all right. Anyway, during the course of the conversation over dinner, Mitchell asked me how many species I thought there were. And I said somewhere between 2 and 12. And he said, yes, that's what I believe too. But having said that, those are only the ones that we hear about or know about. And there has to be many, many more that we will hear about in the decades to come, because the cosmos is so big and so many universes and so many planets and so many stars and so many everything that mathematically there just has to be more than we know about at the present time. Now you ask about the differences. There are a lot of differences in looks and whether there are differences in motivation or not, I don't know. I presume that there would be, because it's like saying you can't expect the United States and Russia and China to have identical interests.
Yeah.
And probably you would find that not all of the species have identical interests. But most of them, as far as I've been able to determine, have been considered to be friendly. This was certainly Wilbert Smith's view from his early contacts. And he painted a very bright picture of our future if we just learn from those people and work with them. And he had nothing negative to say at all. One wonders at some of the negativity, some of the films that are made to make them look bad, and who's sponsoring them and where the information is coming from. I heard a report, unsubstantiated, that when one of the presidents of the United States was briefed on the subject, at least giving him the little bit of information that they give to presidents, that he was told that they were all benign except one. Well, I've been trying for months to find out which one is not. And of course, you just run into a blank wall. And you wonder if there is one or if there isn't one. And it's just one more thing that I think we have to press for when it comes to disclosure. Because General Nathan Twining, way back shortly after Roswell, asked an order declaring them to be enemy alien. And I wonder how many people listening know whether that order has ever been rescinded or not. I don't. I think it'd be a good thing to try and find out. I do know this, that we have been, to the best of my knowledge, always the ones that shot first. And any retaliation that I know about has been provoked. And I don't know whether that's a good way to go about things or not. That's one of the reasons I went public, is that we have a right to know whether we're deliberately provoking people or species, EBs, whatever you want to call them, to the point where ultimately they might break some of their rules and give it to us. And then, of course, as most of you know, one of the things that we've been back engineering, when I say we, the United States, but probably Russia and others, are weapon systems. And what are they going to be used for? The Star Wars, when it was originally put in, had a false cover. It was there for rogue missiles. Well, rogue missiles were not a big problem militarily, I don't think. Their real purpose was to build a defense against visitors from other planets and star systems. And one can suspect that the same is true of the missile defense systems that are being installed in various parts of the world at the present time. So there's so much that we don't know that we really should know, because we, the people, and especially those of you who are paying most of the bills and running up huge debts in the process, have a right to know what your money's being spent for.
True.
And you don't know, which is really dereliction of duty on the part of the Congress, because they shouldn't be spending huge sums without knowing what you, the people, are going to get for it. But it really is a huge subject. So my principal interest at the moment, as I've made clear, is getting the truth on the clean fuels, because I think, well, I'm sure that global warming is the biggest single problem facing the world. But first we have to get the financing, which we were talking about, and then we've got to have the alternative fuels and start making them public, and not with huge royalties, but with no royalties or such minimal royalties that people in Africa and China and everywhere can use them, and we can all reduce our fuel emission gases in concert, and see
Unfortunately,
if we can save the planet.
Nikola Tesla was trying that and got killed for it. So yeah, the minimal royalties is, the government's like, we don't want minimal, we want as much money as we can get.
Yeah, Tesla was way ahead of his time, and of course they've taken his experiments and combined them with what they've learned from the ETs, and developed some very, I would say, I don't know how to describe them, very vicious
Futuristically
weapons.
scary stuff too.
Yeah, really scary stuff.
Now, I could only think about 3 different species of aliens off the top of my head, but considering one of them, the reptilians, are you acquainted with or aware of David Icke?
Say that again.
You had mentioned about 12 different species, and I could only think of Greys, Nordics, and the reptilians. And when I remember the reptilians, I was wondering if you were acquainted with or knew about David Icke.
Yeah, I know about him. Yes.
It doesn't sound like a glowing recommendation. Okay.
I don't really know what. I haven't had a chance to bone up in what he's been saying, but I do know about the species, and I have asked if this is the one the government's referring to, or if it isn't, and of course you just get a blank wall.
Well, it's implied that the reptilians are working in concert with certainly our government, and has infiltrated not only the government but the population in general, and essentially like the TV show V. And they're actually disguised in some sort of either a holographic or a shape-shifting mode that we don't realize that there are reptilians amongst us, kind of thing.
That'd be pretty scary stuff, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've seen some pretty scary videos about it.
And I have a question from Joe in the chat room.
Go ahead.
He would like to know what piece of today's technical equipment was back engineered that's right in front of us right now.
Well, I have right in front of me a little LED light that I carry around in my pocket so that I can read the words to the music Sunday when I'm singing. And without it, I don't know what I do.
Now, Jordan in the chat room wants to know if you're aware of UFOs landings and sightings up in Canada, and where the most sightings in Canada may have taken place.
Well, there have been sightings all over Canada. Unfortunately, I got an email from Grant Cameron today about crashes in Canada, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, else I could tell you more about the crashes. He has one that he's often talked about that he learned from his father. It was a crash in northern Manitoba some years ago. And when people from our Department of Transport, the aircraft safety people, went to investigate the crash, they were met by U.S. soldiers with guns pointed at them.
Yikes.
And so they checked with Ottawa to find out what to do about it, and were finally told to let the Americans have it. So that's one that was on his list from a way back, and I'll be very interested to see what other crashes he's got lined up since then. He's an expert in what presidents have known too. He's probably the number one president of number one expert in what U.S. presidents have known, because some of them apparently have known quite a bit, and some of them practically nothing. And he would be a good one to Google if you want to find out about what U.S. presidents have known. I think one of the scariest things is who the cabal, as it is, or we call it, is working with, and what they have in mind. What are they trying to do to the world? Are they trying to set up a totalitarian system?
You're doing a good job of that.
It is very worrisome. They're certainly driving us into the dust and creating the circumstances under which martial law and so on can be introduced, presumably in order for our own good. I find it pretty disturbing, I guess is the mildest word I can think of, when I look at some of the things that are happening, and I just hope we can start prying some information out of the people that have it and get it into the public domain.
Well, on the Paradigm Research Group page, you have the World Disclosure Day project. You want to touch on that before we run out of time?
Well, I just approve of it, and Stan asked me to sign up as a sponsor, which I did, more than delighted to. And I think Edgar Mitchell is one of my heroes too. We work quite closely together in some areas, and he's pushing for disclosure because he too realizes, I think, the huge dimensions of what we're really talking about, and the fact that, like the iceberg that sank the Titanic, that nearly all of it's underwater. This is underground. We just don't know, and we have to put pressure on all of our governments, A, to tell us what they know, and B, to put pressure on other governments that know more than they do, which is the case between our two countries.
Now, have you heard with the different aliens? Do some of them look like humans?
I'm told that the Nordic blondes look enough like us that they could walk down the street and you wouldn't recognize them at all. The tall whites, some of the women dressed as nurses, I think it was, and went into Las Vegas shopping and were undetected. You certainly couldn't do that with the Greys. Right. So there are some very startling differences in appearance, and there may be some significant differences in their interests. And there are obviously people who know quite a bit about that, but they're not telling us, and why they're not telling us is not very clear.
Now, the Nordics and the Greys actually worked together because they were both on the same craft that Travis Walton dealt with.
Well,
weren't they? I mean, if memory serves, I read the book many years ago, and I was really infuriated that the film version they made went so off book. and all of a
Which
sudden the
book is
aliens
this?
became these. Travis Walton's experience. He had in the ship, he was being examined by Greys when he escaped and found the essentially like the control room or holodeck room. He was met by what appeared to be a Nordic
Yeah.
before he was dropped back on back on Earth. And I was surprised that they worked together, and they had made a film called Fire in the Sky, which infuriated me because not only was it written by a writer that I liked at the time, Tracy Torme, but it went so far off book that it made the aliens into they were harvesting us for food. Nothing like anything of the experience from the book was in the movie. I was just ugh.
That
And I
that
thought,
book, that was a shocking film, a total travesty, and I think the aliens should sue the is it Paramount?
yeah,
Whoever
probably
made
Tracy
it.
Torme was working for Paramount at the time because he was writing for Star Trek Next Generation at the time. You'd think they would have got it right.
Well, it was one of the worst movies I've seen, and certainly the most misrepresenting. It's precisely that sort of thing that I object to, because it is deliberately alienating people and creating fear where no fear is justified. And I resented that film very much.
As did I.
So anyway, there are a lot of things that we have to explore, and a lot of subjects too. We've covered quite a few of them tonight, but certainly the financial system, global warming, and the necessity for total disclosure of the ET presence and technology. And I would recommend again that people look at the connection between these three things and the connection between the people running one of the shows with the others, because I think they are all interconnected. And I talk about the Bilderbergers and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, and I also talk about the cabal, the military and intelligence group that, in my opinion, is in cahoots with them. And I think we have to we've got to spring the trap here and end the travesty and get some truth out, because that's the only thing that's going to set us free, literally.
That's true. And our time is just running right on down. I want to take a minute to thank you for being on with us tonight. It's been a great topic, and you're a great speaker, and we just really appreciate you taking the time to be on.
Well, you're very kind to say so, and I just hope and pray that some of the people listening will not just let it go, but take action, go to the website, look at the action plans, decide how they personally are going to contribute to the change that has to be made if any of us are going to have any kind of a future.
Now, speaking of that, I want to give you a minute to tell all about your books and your websites and how to get there. And I want you, if you're able to, stay on with us for a few minutes after we get off, and we'll chat with you for a minute and thank you properly.
Okay, well, the website that I'm principally interested in you looking at, I've mentioned several times, the www. Victory for the World. My personal website, which I don't give out very much because I don't know what use it would be to most of you.
UFOBCCA?
Pardon me?
Which, well, I'm just looking forward to it. I was wondering if it's the one I found.
What have you got?
Paul Hellyer and the Politics of Exopolitics, that site? Or is that a different page?
No. My personal one, let's see if I've got it here. It's Paul Hellyer web.net, I think it is. It has a web in it because there are several Paul Hellyers in it. But it's, Paul Hellyer web. No, it's paulhellyerweb.com. paulhellyerweb.com and victory for the world.net. So to keep those separate. And the books are light at the end of the tunnel. Survival Plan for the Human Species, which is a good overview of what has happened in the world in recent decades, who has been pulling the strings, who's responsible, and what has to be done about it, and how soon. And the companion book of A Miracle in Waiting is for people who are more interested in the economics. It's a reprint of a book that forecast in 1996 the meltdown that occurred in 2007, 2008. It's as valid today as it was then. It tells you all about the IMF and the World Bank and the Bank for International Settlements and all of these organizations that we're going to have to bring to heel if we're going to have any hope at all.
Are there any dashes in that paulhellerweb.com?
No, it's all one word.
Not,
just Paul Hellyer Web, one word.
Maybe, I left out the Y. There it is. Okay. Oh, awesome.
Nothing in it that I know of.
I got it.
Jeff, you want to give yours real quick, like?
Sure, yeah. My paranormal view aspect of my website is jeffgould.net/2011pnv.htm. That's Jeff Gould with a GEOFFGOULD.net/2011pnv.htm. Paranormal View also has its own page on Facebook, easy to find. Mr. Hellyer, I actually sent you a friend request about a week ago. Feel free to look for it and add me. And on Paranormal View, what is it? Oh, wait, Podomatic. There is paranormalview.com, of course, and or is it oh man, I really
it's
need
theparanormalview.com.
Oh, it's theparanormalview.com. And because I'm looking at the WordPress here, which I know is wrong, so let me take that out. Coolness. And on my pnv.htm site page, I'll have the report on tonight's show, as well as the links to pretty much every book that Mr. Hellyer has indicated, not only written by him, but references and the Travis Walton Experience and other recommendations. And the Embedded Podcast, once Henry has it up and running. Hooray!
And that'll be sometime later on tonight. Again, stay tuned for Joe and Tara on Visions Radio Magazine right after our show. And I want to remind everybody that next week we have Candy O'Donnell. She is a psychic medium and author, and we will have her on. I think she will maybe even be doing some readings. So see you next week. We're fixing to jump off, and again, I want to thank everybody. Till next week, this is Henry Foister.
Craig Rupp.
We always collide.
All right. We'll see you next week, same time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
We're leaving. We're gone. Paranormal View. Come back and visit us again if you dare.